The frozen creek cracked beneath Zelda Garrett's boots like a gunshot, and in one breathless moment she was airborne, her arms flailing as laughter erupted from the group of ranch hands watching from the snowy bank. The December cold of 1876 bit through her heavy wool skirts as she crashed through the thin ice, the shock of frigid water stealing the air from her lungs. Her curves, which the town gossips never tired of discussing, made her descent graceless and spectacular, her body breaking through the surface with an ungainly splash that sent shards of ice skittering across the frozen expanse. The laughter grew louder, echoing across the white landscape outside Gonzales, Texas, where winter had arrived with unusual ferocity that year, transforming the normally mild climate into something resembling the Northern Territories. Zelda gasped, her thick dark hair falling from its pins as she struggled against the weight of her waterlogged clothing. The creek was shallow, only reaching her waist, but the cold was merciless, seeping into her bones with vicious intent. Her teeth began to chatter immediately, her full figure shaking violently as she tried to find purchase on the slippery creek bed. Behind her, the ranch hands continued their cruel amusement, their voices carrying across the frozen air with mocking commentary about her size, her clumsiness, her presence in a place where unmarried women of 22 had no business wandering alone. Then strong hands gripped her arms, hauling her upward with surprising gentleness, despite the urgency of the motion. Zelda found herself pressed against a solid chest, wool coat rough against her frozen cheek, and arms that didn't let go even when her feet found solid ground on the bank. She looked up through wet lashes to see a face she recognized from town, though she had never been formally introduced to the man who now held her with such determined care. Killian Edwards was known throughout Gonzales as a fair but solitary cowboy, a man who kept to himself and worked harder than anyone else on the sprawling Diamond Creek Ranch. His reputation was spotless in a time and place where reputations meant everything, and his dark eyes, now fixed on Zelda with concern that warmed her more than any fire could, held none of the mockery she had seen in the other men's faces. He was perhaps 25, with sun-weathered skin and strong features that spoke of long days under the Texas sky, though that sky was currently hidden behind heavy gray clouds that promised more snow. "Get her a blanket," Killian barked at the ranch hands, his voice cutting through their laughter like a blade. The amusement died instantly, replaced by shuffling feet and averted eyes. His arms remained around Zelda, one hand rubbing her back in broad strokes, as if trying to force warmth back into her body through sheer determination. Now, one of the younger hands, a boy named Timothy who had laughed the loudest, scrambled toward the horses tied nearby. Zelda tried to speak, to thank the man holding her, but her jaw was locked tight with cold, her whole body shaking so violently that standing upright seemed impossible. Killian must have sensed this because he simply held tighter, taking her full weight without complaint, his body blocking the worst of the wind that had picked up across the open prairie. "What in God's name were you doing out here alone?" His voice was low now, meant only for her, and there was something in it that made Zelda's heart skip despite her miserable state. Concern, yes, but also something else. Something that recognized her as more than the object of ridicule she had just been. Timothy returned with a thick wool blanket, and Killian wrapped it around Zelda's shoulders without releasing her from his embrace. In fact, he pulled her closer, until she was essentially cocooned against him, the blanket forming a barrier between her soaked clothing and the brutal December air. His heat was astonishing, radiating through the layers between them, and Zelda found herself burrowing into it instinctively, propriety forgotten in the face of genuine cold that could kill. Taking the shortcut to the Miller place, she finally managed, her voice emerging as barely more than a whisper. "My aunt is sick. I was bringing her medicine." Killian's jaw tightened. "This is no shortcut in winter. The creek freezes over but not solid. You could have died." "I did not realize," Zelda said, and hated how small her voice sounded. She was not a small woman in any sense. At 5 feet 7 inches, she stood taller than many men, and her figure was what polite society called substantial and what cruel tongues called fat. She had learned to carry herself with pride despite the whispers, had built armor around her heart against the knowledge that men like those ranch hands would only ever see her as a joke. Yet here was Killian Edwards, holding her as if she were something precious, his arms showing no sign of releasing her, despite the fact that she was now bundled in the blanket and technically capable of standing alone. "We need to get you warm," Killian said, making a decision. "Diamond Creek is closer than town. Can you ride?" Zelda nodded, though she was not entirely certain. Her legs felt like frozen wood, stiff and unresponsive. Killian seemed to sense her uncertainty because he simply lifted her, blanket and all, and carried her to his horse. The ranch hands watched in silence now. Their earlier mockery completely vanished under the weight of their employer's obvious disapproval. Killian was not the ranch owner, but he was the foreman, and his word carried the authority of Old Man Dalton himself. He mounted first, then reached down to lift Zelda into the saddle in front of him. The position was scandalously intimate, her body pressed back against his chest, his arms coming around her to grip the reins. Under normal circumstances, Zelda would have protested, would have insisted on riding her own horse or walking or anything to preserve her reputation. But these were not normal circumstances, and the warmth of Killian's body was the only thing keeping the dangerous cold at bay. "Take her horse back to town," Killian ordered Timothy. "Tell folks at the general store that Miss Garrett had an accident but she is safe at Diamond Creek. Someone should ride out to check on her aunt at the Miller place." "Yes, sir," Timothy said quickly, his young face showing genuine remorse now. He was perhaps 17, old enough to know better than to laugh at someone's misfortune, young enough to still be learning that lesson the hard way. Killian turned his horse toward the northeast, where the Diamond Creek Ranch sprawled across thousands of acres of Texas prairie. It was the largest ranch in Gonzales County, a cattle empire built over decades by the Dalton family. Zelda knew of it, as everyone did, but she had never been there. Her life in Gonzales revolved around the small dress shop. She ran with her mother, creating and altering clothing for the women of the town and surrounding ranches. It was respectable work for a woman, though not particularly profitable, and it kept her busy enough that she rarely ventured far from Main Street. The ride to the ranch took nearly 40 minutes, and by the time the main house came into view, Zelda had stopped shaking quite so violently. Killian had kept up a steady stream of conversation, forcing her to respond, keeping her mind focused on something other than the cold. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle drive they had just completed before winter set in, about the new windmill they were building near the north pasture. His voice was deep and steady, surprisingly educated for a cowboy, and Zelda found herself listening not just to stay alert, but because she genuinely wanted to hear what he would say next. The ranch house was a sprawling structure of wood and stone, larger than any private residence Zelda had ever seen. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, promising heat and safety. Killian rode right up to the front porch, dismounting quickly before reaching up to lift Zelda down. Her legs buckled the moment they touched ground, and once again she found herself caught in his arms. "I have you," he said simply, and carried her inside. The warmth of the house hit like a physical force, and Zelda gasped at the sudden change in temperature. A Mexican woman in her 50s appeared in the hallway, her eyes widening at the sight of Killian carrying a half-frozen woman through the front door. "Madre de Dios," she breathed. "What happened?" "Creek accident, Rosa. She needs dry clothes and hot water. Can you help?" Rosa was already moving, her competent hands guiding Killian toward a bedroom on the first floor. "Bring her here. I will take care of everything. You get out and let me do this properly." Killian set Zelda carefully on a chair near a fireplace that already blazed with heat. His hands lingered for just a moment on her shoulders, his dark eyes searching her face. "You will be all right now. Rosa is the best. She will take good care of you." Zelda wanted to thank him, to say something meaningful about his kindness, about how he had defended her against the mockery of his own men, about how safe she felt in his presence. But her throat was tight with emotion and residual cold, and all she managed was a small nod. Killian's expression softened, and for a moment she thought he might say something more. Instead, he squeezed her shoulder gently and left, closing the door behind him. Rosa immediately began stripping away the wet clothing, clucking her tongue in a mixture of sympathy and disapproval. "Men," she muttered. "They think they know everything about winter, but they let a young woman walk alone by the creek. Foolish. All of them foolish." "It was my choice," Zelda said through chattering teeth. "They did not know I would be there." "Still foolish," Rosa insisted, but her hands were gentle as she helped Zelda out of the frozen layers. The full extent of her curves was revealed as the clothing came away, and Zelda braced herself for the inevitable commentary. But Rosa only smiled, a knowing warmth in her eyes. "You are built like my sisters, like my mother. Good, strong women who bear healthy babies and live long lives. Here, into this nightgown. It is mine, so it should fit well enough." The nightgown was soft flannel, worn but clean and blessedly dry. Rosa wrapped Zelda in 2 more blankets before seating her in a chair directly before the fire. Hot bricks wrapped in cloth were placed at her feet, and a cup of something steaming was pressed into her hands. "Drink," Rosa commanded. "It is chocolate with cinnamon and a little whiskey. It will warm you from inside." Zelda drank, and the liquid was indeed warming, spreading heat through her chest and belly. Slowly, painfully, feeling began to return to her extremities. Her toes burned, her fingers ached, but Rosa assured her this was good, that it meant nothing was frozen beyond recovery. "You were lucky," Rosa said, settling into a chair beside her. "Lucky that Killian was there. He is a good man, that one. The best I have known, and I have known many men in my 60 years. He seemed very kind," Zelda said carefully, still feeling the ghost of his arms around her, the solid strength of his chest against her back during the ride. Rosa's smile turned sly. "Kind, yes. Also handsome, no. And unmarried. Though many have tried to catch his eye, he remains alone. Too much work, he says. Too much responsibility. But I think he has been waiting for the right woman." Zelda felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire or the whiskey. "I am sure I do not know what you mean." "No." Rosa's eyebrows lifted. "Then you did not see how he looked at you, how he held you. I have worked for the Dalton family for 30 years, and I have seen Killian Edwards grow from a boy of 15 to the man he is now. I have never seen him carry a woman through that door. Never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you just now." Before Zelda could formulate a response, a knock sounded at the door. Rosa rose to answer it, and Killian's voice filtered through. "How is she? Getting warm. No frostbite, I think, but she must stay here tonight. She cannot go back to town in this weather. Not in her condition." There was a pause, and Zelda could imagine Killian standing in the hallway, considering this news and its implications for her reputation. In a town like Gonzales, an unmarried woman spending the night at a ranch full of men, even with a respectable chaperone like Rosa, would cause talk. "I will send word to her family," Killian said finally. "And I will make sure everyone understands that she was properly chaperoned, that this was a matter of her health and safety." "You are a good boy," Rosa said warmly. "Your mother would be proud." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "May I speak with her, just for a moment?" Rosa glanced back at Zelda, who nodded despite her state of undress. She was buried in blankets from chin to toe, perfectly modest despite the nightgown. Rosa opened the door wider and Killian stepped inside, his hat now removed, his dark hair slightly mussed from the ride. He stayed near the door, as if aware that coming closer would be improper. His eyes found Zelda's across the room, and the concern in them made her chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with cold or fear. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," he said. "Truly all right." "I am," Zelda assured him. "Thanks to you, if you had not been there, if you had not helped me." She trailed off, not wanting to complete that thought. "But I was there," Killian said firmly, "and I did help. And now you are safe. That is all that matters." He shifted his weight, suddenly seeming less confident. "I also wanted to apologize for the men. Their behavior was unacceptable. They will be disciplined." "Please do not be too harsh," Zelda said quickly. "They are young. They did not understand the danger." "They laughed at you," Killian said, and there was steel in his voice now. "They mocked you when you needed help. That is not something I tolerate among men who work for me." The words warmed Zelda more than the fire, more than the whiskey. Here was a man who saw cruelty for what it was, who would not excuse it or diminish it. Here was a man who had not hesitated to help her, who had held her with care and dignity, who had brought her to safety without a single comment about her size or shape or the scandal this might cause. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Killian's expression gentled. "You do not need to thank me for doing what any decent man would do." "But you are not any man," Zelda said before she could stop herself. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Rosa made a small, satisfied sound and busied herself with the fire, suddenly very interested in arranging the logs. Killian took a step closer, then seemed to remember propriety and stopped. "Rest now," he said. "Rosa will take good care of you. If you need anything, anything at all, I am just down the hall." He left before Zelda could respond, and she was alone again with Rosa, who was now smiling broadly. "You see," the older woman said, "I told you, the way he looks at you, that is not a usual look." Zelda wanted to protest, to say that Rosa was imagining things, that a man like Killian Edwards would never look at a woman like her with genuine interest. But the words would not come, because some part of her, the part that remembered the strength of his arms and the gentleness of his touch, wanted desperately to believe that Rosa might be right. The evening passed slowly. Rosa brought food, simple but delicious beef stew with fresh bread, and Zelda ate despite not feeling particularly hungry. The cold had leached her appetite, but Rosa insisted, hovering like a determined mother hen until Zelda had cleaned her plate. As darkness fell completely, Rosa helped her into a proper bed, piling quilts on top until Zelda was buried in warmth. "Sleep now," Rosa said. "Tomorrow will be better, you will see." But sleep did not come easily. Zelda lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch house settling around her, and thought about Killian Edwards. She had seen him in town before, of course. Gonzales was not so large that anyone could remain a complete stranger. But she had never truly noticed him, or perhaps she had trained herself not to notice men like him. Men who were handsome and capable and respected. Men who could have their pick of the pretty, slender girls who fluttered around them like butterflies. Zelda had learned long ago that she was not a butterfly. She was substantial, solid, real. Her body took up space in a world that preferred women to be small and delicate. She had made peace with this, or so she told herself. She had her work, her mother, her small circle of friends. She did not need a man to validate her existence or her worth. Yet lying in the darkness of the Diamond Creek Ranch, wrapped in borrowed nightclothes and the lingering memory of Killian's embrace, Zelda found herself wondering what it might be like to be wanted. Not despite her curves, but without them mattering at all. To be held by someone who saw beyond the physical to the person beneath. To be looked at the way Rosa claimed Killian had looked at her. She must have eventually slept, because the next thing she knew, pale winter sunlight was filtering through the curtains, and Rosa was bustling in with fresh clothing. "These belonged to Mr. Dalton's late wife," Rosa explained, laying out a practical riding skirt and blouse. "She was a big woman too, strong and beautiful. These should fit you well." The clothing did fit, remarkably well, and Zelda was grateful to be dressed in something other than a nightgown. Her own clothes from yesterday had been washed and were drying by the kitchen fire, Rosa informed her, but they would not be ready for hours yet. Zelda did not mind. The borrowed clothes were of good quality, better than anything she owned, and they made her feel less like a burden and more like a proper guest. Rosa led her to the dining room, where breakfast was laid out on a long table. Several ranch hands were eating quickly before heading out to their morning tasks, and they fell silent when Zelda entered. She braced herself for stares or whispers, but instead the men nodded respectfully and returned to their meals. Timothy, the young hand from yesterday, actually stood and pulled out a chair for her. "Miss Garrett," he said, his face red with embarrassment, "I want to apologize for yesterday, for laughing. It was wrong of me, and I am sorry." Zelda was so surprised that for a moment she could only stare. Then she smiled, genuinely touched by the boy's obvious sincerity. "Thank you, Timothy. I accept your apology." Relief flooded his features, and he returned to his seat. The other men who had been present yesterday offered similar apologies, their words awkward but earnest. Zelda realized that Killian must have spoken to them, must have made clear that their behavior had been unacceptable. The thought warmed her even more than the hot coffee Rosa poured into her cup. Killian himself appeared a few minutes later, and Zelda's breath caught at the sight of him. In the chaos of yesterday, she had registered only the impression of strength and kindness. Now, in the morning light, she could truly see him. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of a man who spent his life doing physical labor. His face was weathered but not old, his dark eyes sharp with intelligence, and his mouth, currently set in a serious line, looked like it would be beautiful when it smiled. "Miss Garrett," he said, and that mouth did curve up slightly. "It is good to see you looking better this morning." "I feel much better, thank you," Zelda said, suddenly acutely aware of her appearance. Rosa had braided her long dark hair, but she had no powder or lip rouge, no jewelry or any of the small things women used to make themselves presentable. In the borrowed clothes, she felt exposed, uncertain. If Killian noticed her discomfort, he gave no sign. He simply filled a plate with food and sat down across from her, his presence both comforting and unnerving. The ranch hands finished their meals and headed out, leaving Killian, Zelda, and Rosa alone in the dining room. "I sent word to town yesterday evening," Killian said. "Your mother knows you are safe. I also had someone check on your aunt at the Miller place. She is not doing well, but the doctor has been called." Guilt washed through Zelda. "I should be there. I was bringing her medicine when I fell." "You nearly died yesterday," Killian said bluntly. "You are in no condition to go anywhere yet. Give yourself today to fully recover, and I will take you to your aunt tomorrow if the weather holds." Zelda wanted to argue, but the truth was she still felt shaky, her body protesting the abuse it had suffered. And the thought of spending another day at the ranch in Killian's presence was far more appealing than it should have been. "That is very kind of you," she said instead. Killian shook his head. "Kindness has nothing to do with it. It is simply the right thing to do." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and then Killian said, "Rosa tells me you run a dress shop in town. That must be interesting work." Zelda found herself telling him about the shop, about the challenge of creating beautiful garments that suited each woman's individual body and personality, about the satisfaction of seeing someone light up when they found a dress that made them feel truly beautiful. Killian listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was really paying attention, not just making polite conversation. "My mother taught me everything," Zelda said. "She learned from her mother who learned from hers. It is a family trade, passed down through generations." "It sounds like you love it," Killian observed. "I do," Zelda admitted. "Though sometimes I wonder what it would be like to do something different, to travel maybe, to see more of the world than just Gonzales." "I understand that feeling," Killian said quietly. "I have worked on this ranch since I was 15 years old. It is all I have ever known. But sometimes I wonder what else is out there." "Why do you stay?" Zelda asked. Killian considered the question. "Loyalty, I suppose. The Daltons took me in when I had nothing. My parents died of fever when I was young, and I was headed for the orphan train when old man Dalton gave me a job and a place to live. I owe them everything." There was a story there, Zelda sensed, deeper than what he was saying. Pain and loss, and a determination to build something stable from the ruins of his childhood. She recognized it because she saw the same thing in herself. Her father had died when she was 12, leaving her mother to raise her alone while running a business that barely kept them fed and housed. They had survived through sheer determination and the refusal to give up. "That is admirable," Zelda said. "Not everyone honors their debts." "Not a debt," Killian corrected. "A choice. There is a difference." The conversation continued through breakfast and into the morning as Killian, despite having work to oversee, seemed reluctant to leave. Rosa eventually shooed them both out of the dining room, muttering about people underfoot while she tried to clean, and Killian offered to show Zelda around the ranch. The day was still cold but clearer than yesterday, the sun breaking through the clouds to cast pale light across the snow-covered prairie. Killian gave Zelda a heavy coat that had belonged to Mrs. Dalton, and they walked through the ranch compound, Killian pointing out various buildings and explaining their functions. The stables, the bunkhouse, the workshops where saddles and tools were repaired, the large barn where cattle were kept during the worst weather. It was a whole community unto itself, and Zelda was fascinated by the complexity of it all. Killian clearly loved the ranch, his pride evident in every word he spoke about the operation. But there was also weariness there, the burden of responsibility that came with managing so much. "Do you ever rest?" Zelda asked as they paused near a corral where several horses were running. Killian looked surprised by the question. "Rest. Take a day off. Do something just for yourself, not for the ranch or the Daltons or anyone else." He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horses but his mind clearly elsewhere. "No," he finally said. "I suppose I do not. There is always too much to do." "That sounds lonely," Zelda said softly. Killian turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "It has been," he admitted, "but perhaps that is changing." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility, and Zelda felt her heart begin to race. This was dangerous territory. She was a practical woman who understood the realities of her world. Men like Killian did not pursue women like her, not seriously. There might be attraction, even genuine affection, but in the end, they always chose someone more acceptable, more conventionally beautiful. Yet standing there in the cold morning light, with Killian looking at her as if she were the most interesting person he had ever met, Zelda allowed herself to hope. "I should check on the north pasture," Killian said finally, breaking the spell. "But would you like to ride out with me? Unless you are too tired." "I would like that very much," Zelda said, and was rewarded with a smile that transformed Killian's serious face into something boyish and beautiful. They saddled 2 horses, Killian choosing a gentle mare for Zelda, and rode out across the ranch. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, rolling prairie dotted with cattle and the occasional stand of trees. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, and Zelda found herself understanding why someone could love this place enough to dedicate their entire life to it. Killian was clearly at home on horseback, moving with the animal as if they were one entity. Zelda was a competent rider but nowhere near his level, and she appreciated that he kept their pace leisurely, never making her feel rushed or inadequate. They rode for over an hour, checking fence lines and water sources, Killian explaining the work as they went. At the north pasture, they dismounted to examine a section of fence that had been damaged in the recent cold snap. Killian produced tools from his saddlebag and set to work repairing it, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Zelda watched, fascinated by the casual competence with which he approached the task. "May I help?" she asked. Killian glanced up, surprised. "It is cold work. Your hands will freeze." "I am already wearing gloves," Zelda pointed out. "And I am not made of spun sugar. I will not break." Something flickered in Killian's eyes, approval or respect, or maybe both. He handed her a pair of wire cutters and showed her what to do. They worked together in companionable silence, Zelda following his instructions, Killian occasionally reaching over to adjust her grip or demonstrate a technique. Their hands brushed several times, and each contact sent warmth racing up Zelda's arms despite the cold. When the fence was repaired, they mounted again and headed back toward the ranch house. The sun was now high in the sky, though it provided little warmth. Zelda's cheeks burned with cold, but she felt more alive than she had in months, maybe years. There was something about being out here in the open, working alongside Killian, that made her feel capable and valued in a way her life in town rarely did. They returned to find Rosa preparing a midday meal, and the 3 of them ate together in the kitchen, the atmosphere warm and easy. Rosa told stories about the Dalton family, about her own children grown and scattered across Texas, about her late husband who had worked as a wrangler on the ranch until his death 10 years prior. Zelda shared stories about the dress shop, about the sometimes ridiculous requests she received from wealthy customers, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with her own hands. Killian contributed less to the conversation but listened intently, his eyes often on Zelda's face as she spoke. The attention should have made her nervous, but instead it felt natural, right, as if this was how things were always meant to be. The afternoon brought more snow, and Killian insisted that Zelda remain at the ranch another night. She agreed with perhaps less reluctance than was proper, and Rosa showed her to the same bedroom as before. This time, as evening fell, there was a knock on the door, and Killian stood there with a book in his hands. "I thought you might want something to read," he said. "It can be boring being stuck inside." The book was a collection of poetry, worn but well cared for. Zelda took it carefully, surprised by the gift. "Thank you, I love poetry." "Do you?" Killian's face lit up. So do I, though most men would rather die than admit it. Then we shall both keep your secret, Zelda said, smiling. Killian hesitated in the doorway, and Zelda sensed he wanted to say something more. Finally, he spoke. Would you like to sit by the fire for a while? In the parlor, I mean. Rosa will be there too, so it would be proper. But I thought, if you are not too tired, we could talk. Zelda's heart fluttered. I would like that. The parlor was a comfortable room lined with books, a large fireplace dominating one wall. Rosa sat in a corner chair, her knitting needles clicking steadily, a discreet but undeniable presence. Killian and Zelda settled on opposite ends of a sofa, a respectful distance between them, and talked about everything and nothing. Books they had read, places they dreamed of seeing, childhood memories both happy and sad. Zelda learned that Killian could read in both English and Spanish, that he had taught himself from books in the Dalton family library, that his mother had been a schoolteacher before she married, and she had instilled in him a love of learning that survived even her death. That he had a younger sister who had gone east to live with relatives after their parents died, and he had not seen her in over 10 years, though they corresponded regularly. Killian learned that Zelda had always wanted to travel to France, to see the great fashion houses of Paris. That she wrote poetry in secret, filling notebooks with verses she had never shown anyone. That her father had been a Confederate soldier who came home broken from the war, and his slow decline from drink and despair had shaped her childhood in ways both painful and profound. They talked until Rosa finally announced she was going to bed, her eyes twinkling with knowing amusement as she left them alone. The impropriety should have sent Zelda fleeing to her own room, but she found she did not want to go. Killian seemed to feel the same because he made no move to end the evening. Thank you for sharing your stories with me, Killian said quietly. I know some of them must have been difficult to tell. No more difficult than yours, Zelda replied. We have both known loss. Yes, Killian agreed. But we have survived. That matters. He reached across the distance between them and took her hand. The gesture was simple, chaste even, but it sent electricity racing through Zelda's entire body. His hand was large and calloused, warm and strong, and it held hers as if it were something precious. Zelda, he said, and the sound of her name in his voice made her shiver. I know we have only just met. I know this is sudden and probably improper, and I have no right to say what I am about to say. But I need you to know that meeting you has changed something in me. When I saw you fall through that ice, when I thought about what could have happened if I had not been there, I felt something I have never felt before. Fear, yes, but also this fierce need to protect you, to keep you safe, to never let anything hurt you. Zelda's throat was tight, her eyes burning with unshed tears. Killian, please let me finish, he said gently. I do not know what you think of me. I do not know if you feel anything at all beyond gratitude for my help. But I need you to know that when I look at you, I see the most beautiful woman I have ever known. Not despite who you are, but because of who you are. Your strength, your kindness, your intelligence, your courage. The way you smile, the way you speak, the way you see the world. Everything about you calls to me. A tear spilled down Zelda's cheek, and Killian reached up with his free hand to gently brush it away. Do not cry, he whispered, unless those are happy tears. I do not know what they are, Zelda admitted. No one has ever said such things to me before. No one has ever looked at me the way you do. Then everyone else is a fool, Killian said fiercely. And I am the luckiest man alive because I was the one who found you. You saved me, Zelda said. No, Killian corrected. We saved each other. I have been alone for so long, Zelda. Going through the motions, doing my duty, never really living. And then you fell through the ice and suddenly everything became clear. I want more than this. I want a life, not just an existence. I want laughter and companionship and someone to share my days with. I want you." The words hung in the air between them, a declaration and a question all at once. Zelda's mind raced, part of her screaming caution, reminding her of all the times she had been disappointed, all the ways this could go wrong. But her heart, that traitorous organ, was singing a different song. A song of possibility and hope and the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of being truly seen. "I want that too," she whispered. "I want you too." Killian's smile was brilliant, transforming his face. He leaned closer, moving slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Zelda did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the promise of something beautiful that shimmered between them like heat from a fire. Their lips met softly, tentatively, a question being asked and answered. Then Killian's hand came up to cup her face, and the kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more real. Zelda had been kissed before, awkward stolen moments in her youth, but nothing like this. Nothing that made her feel like she was burning and drowning and flying all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Killian rested his forehead against hers. "I should apologize for that," he murmured, "but I am not sorry." "Good," Zelda said, "because neither am I." They sat together in the firelight, hands clasped, until the fire burned down to embers and the cold began to seep back into the room. Only then did Killian reluctantly stand, pulling Zelda up with him. "I should let you sleep," he said. "Tomorrow I will take you into town as I promised. And then, if you will allow it, I would like to call on you properly, to court you the way you deserve." "I would like that very much," Zelda said. They walked to her bedroom door together, neither wanting to separate. At the threshold, Killian kissed her again, soft and sweet, a promise for tomorrow and all the tomorrows to come. "Good night, Zelda Garrett," he said. "Good night, Killian Edwards," she replied. Zelda lay in bed long after he left, too excited to sleep, her fingers touching her lips where his had been. 2 days ago, she had been simply Zelda, the curvy dressmaker's daughter whom men overlooked and gossips pitied. Now she was Zelda, the woman who had captured the heart of Killian Edwards. The woman who had fallen through the ice and found something far more precious than cold water waiting on the other side. Morning came too quickly and too slowly. Zelda woke to find Rosa had returned her own clothes, cleaned and dried, and she dressed with care, wanting to look her best when she returned to town. She knew there would be talk, knew that her overnight stay at the ranch would provide fodder for gossip for weeks. But for once, she found she did not care. Let them talk. She had found something real, something worth whatever social cost it might exact. Killian was waiting for her after breakfast, 2 horses saddled and ready. The ride into Gonzales took just under an hour, and they spent it talking about everything they still wanted to learn about each other. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, as if they had known each other for years instead of days. As they approached the town, Zelda felt Killian tense beside her. "What is it?" she asked. "I am about to ride into town with you openly," he said. "Everyone will see us together. Your reputation, my reputation, will survive," Zelda interrupted. "And if people choose to think badly of me for being sensible enough to accept help when I needed it, that says more about them than it does about me." Killian's expression was admiring. "You are remarkable." "I am practical," Zelda corrected. "There is a difference." They rode down Main Street together, and Zelda could feel eyes on them from every window and doorway. Killian seemed unbothered by the attention, his bearing proud and protective as they made their way to the dress shop. He dismounted first and came around to help Zelda down, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I will call on you tomorrow evening," he said, "if that suits you." "That suits me very well," Zelda replied. He tipped his hat and remounted, riding away toward the Miller place to check on her aunt as he had promised. Zelda watched him go, her heart full, before turning to face the inevitable interrogation from her mother. Margaret Garrett was waiting inside the shop, her face tight with worry that melted into relief when Zelda walked through the door. She pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace, and for a moment they just held each other. "Thank God you are safe," Margaret breathed. "When word came that you had fallen through the ice, I thought I feared. I am fine, Mama," Zelda assured her. "Killian Edwards saved me. He took me to the ranch where I could recover properly." Margaret pulled back, her shrewd eyes searching Zelda's face. "And this Killian Edwards? He treated you with respect, more than respect," Zelda said softly. "He treated me with kindness and care. He is a good man, Mama." Something in Zelda's tone must have conveyed more than just her words because Margaret's expression shifted, softening. "You care for him?" It was not a question, but Zelda answered anyway. "Yes, I know it is fast, I know it seems impossible, but yes, I care for him. Very much." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, then she smiled. "Then I look forward to meeting this man who has captured my daughter's heart." The next days and weeks passed in a blur of happiness. Killian called on Zelda as promised, appearing at the shop with flowers and shy smiles. They walked together through the town, attended church services side by side, shared meals at the small restaurant on Main Street. Every moment together revealed new facets of each other, new reasons to care, new depths to explore. The gossips did talk, of course. Tongues wagged about the curvy dressmaker who had somehow ensnared the handsome ranch foreman. Some women were catty, suggesting Zelda had trapped him somehow, used her predicament to force his hand. Others were more generous, seeing the obvious affection between them and wishing them well. Zelda tried not to care about the whispers, but she was human, and they stung. It was Killian who finally set her fears to rest. They were sitting in the small parlor behind the dress shop one evening in late January, chaperoned by Margaret, who was sewing in the corner, when Zelda finally voiced her concerns. "They say I am not good enough for you," she said quietly. "That you could have anyone, someone prettier, someone more suitable." Killian set down the book he had been reading and turned to face her fully. "Do you want to know what I think when I hear such talk?" Zelda nodded. "I think they are right," Killian said, and Zelda's heart plummeted. But before she could pull away, he took her hands in his. "They are right that I could have anyone. Any shallow, vapid girl who cares only for appearances and status. Any woman who would see me as a provider rather than a partner. Any person who would expect me to change who I am to fit some ideal of what a husband should be." He lifted her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "But I do not want any of those women. I want you, Zelda Garrett. You with your generous curves and your brilliant mind. You with your talent and your strength. You who looks at me and sees a person, not a position or a paycheck. You who makes me laugh and challenges me to think and inspires me to be better than I am." Tears streamed down Zelda's face now, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I love you," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I know it is too soon. I know we should wait, but I cannot help it. I love you, Killian Edwards." Killian's answering smile was incandescent. "Then we are both too soon and too hasty, because I love you too, Zelda Garrett. I have loved you since the moment I pulled you from that ice, and you looked at me like I was a hero. I want to be your hero every day for the rest of my life." From her corner, Margaret cleared her throat. "I believe this is the part where you ask for my permission to marry my daughter, young man." Killian stood immediately, suddenly looking nervous for the first time since Zelda had met him. "Mrs. Garrett, I know I should have asked you first. I know I should have waited, been more proper. But I love your daughter with all my heart, and I would be honored if you would give me permission to ask for her hand in marriage." Margaret set down her sewing and regarded Killian with the stern expression that had terrified Zelda as a child. "My daughter is my greatest treasure, Mr. Edwards. I raised her alone after her father died, worked myself to the bone to provide for her, taught her to be strong and independent. I will not give her away to just any man." "I understand," Killian said quietly, "and I promise you that I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of her. I will cherish her, support her dreams, stand beside her as her partner and equal. I will never diminish her or try to change her. She is perfect exactly as she is." Margaret's stern expression cracked, and she smiled. "Then you have my blessing, Killian Edwards. Take care of my girl." Killian turned to Zelda, dropping to one knee right there in the parlor. He had no ring, no grand speech prepared, but his eyes held everything Zelda needed to see. "Zelda Garrett, will you marry me?" he asked simply. "Yes," Zelda said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Killian surged to his feet and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply, propriety forgotten in the joy of the moment. When they finally broke apart, Margaret was crying too, and the three of them embraced, bound together by love and hope and the promise of a future built on mutual respect and devotion. The wedding was planned for April, giving Zelda time to create her own wedding dress and make arrangements for the shop. Killian spoke with Old Man Dalton, who was delighted by the news and offered to build them a small house on the ranch property. It would be their home, Killian explained, but close enough to the main operation that he could continue his work as foreman. Zelda would be able to keep the dress shop in town, traveling back and forth as needed. It was more than Zelda had dared dream. A man who loved her, a home of her own, the freedom to continue her work. Everything she wanted, everything she needed, all offered with no strings attached, no expectations that she change or diminish herself. The months between the engagement and the wedding flew by. Zelda spent her days creating the most beautiful wedding dress she had ever designed, pouring all her hopes and dreams into every stitch. Killian visited whenever he could, and they spent long hours planning their future, talking about the life they would build together. In March, Killian's sister Rachel arrived from the east, traveling all the way to Texas to attend her brother's wedding. She was a petite woman with Killian's dark eyes and a warm smile, and she embraced Zelda immediately, welcoming her into the family with genuine joy. Having lost her own father and grown up without siblings, Zelda was overwhelmed by the sudden expansion of her family, by the sense of belonging that came with being welcomed so completely. Rachel stayed with Zelda and Margaret in the apartment above the dress shop, and the three women spent their evenings together, sewing and talking and laughing. Rachel shared stories about Killian as a boy, about his fierce protectiveness and his gentle heart, and Zelda fell even more deeply in love with the man she was about to marry. Finally, April arrived, bringing with it warm sunshine and the promise of spring. The wedding was held in the small church on Main Street, with most of the town in attendance. Old Man Dalton gave Zelda away, his weathered face beaming with grandfatherly pride. Rosa and Margaret cried throughout the entire ceremony. Timothy, the young ranch hand who had apologized so earnestly, served as one of the groomsmen, but Zelda saw none of them. Her eyes were fixed on Killian, who stood at the altar looking more handsome than she had ever seen him, his face reflecting the same overwhelming love she felt pouring from her own heart. When the preacher asked if she would take this man to be her lawfully wedded husband, her "I do" rang out clear and strong, with no hesitation, no doubt. Killian's vows were equally firm, his voice steady as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life. When he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Zelda felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. This was right. This was real. This was forever. The kiss that sealed their union was chaste by necessity, performed in front of the entire congregation, but it held within it all the passion and promise of their future together. When they turned to face their friends and family as husband and wife, the applause was thunderous, genuine joy radiating from everyone present. The reception was held at the ranch, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. Zelda danced with Killian until her feet ached, then danced some more, unwilling to let go of this perfect moment. He held her close, whispering words of love in her ear, his hands reverent on her waist, her back, her face. Finally, as midnight approached, they slipped away to the small house that would be their new home. It was simple but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a parlor that faced east to catch the morning sun. Killian carried Zelda over the threshold, and they stood together in the darkness, alone for the first time as husband and wife. "I love you, Mrs. Edwards," Killian said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you too, Mr. Edwards," Zelda replied, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me. Thank you for falling through that ice," Killian said with a smile. "Best accident that ever happened to me." Zelda laughed, the sound bright in the quiet house. "I suppose I should thank those ranch hands for laughing. If you had not been so angry on my behalf, we might never have truly talked." "Then I shall send them a thank you note," Killian said solemnly, though his eyes were dancing. "Dear gentlemen, thank you for being complete idiots. It worked out very well for me." They laughed together, and then the laughter faded into something deeper, something more profound. The first night of their marriage was everything Zelda had hoped and more, Killian gentle and passionate by turns, whispering words of love and devotion that made her heart soar. He cherished her body as he had promised to cherish her heart, with reverence and desire, and a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Zelda's head on Killian's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. "I was so frightened," she admitted quietly. "When I fell through the ice, I thought I was going to die." "But you did not," Killian said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You lived. We both lived. And now we have the rest of our lives together." "The rest of our lives," Zelda repeated, testing the words, finding them sweet. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Killian agreed. "So do I." The months that followed were the happiest of Zelda's life. She settled into her new role as wife and mistress of her own home, balancing her work at the dress shop with her duties at the ranch. Killian had been right that she could do both, and the routine they established worked well. 3 days a week she traveled into town to work at the shop, often staying overnight with her mother. The other days she spent at the ranch, helping Rosa with the house, tending a garden and learning the rhythms of ranch life. She also spent time getting to know the ranch hands, many of whom had initially been skeptical of their foreman's wife, but who gradually came to respect her practical nature and genuine interest in their work. Timothy especially became a friend, the young man clearly relieved to have been forgiven for his earlier transgression. In July, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She told Killian one evening as they sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. He was silent for a long moment after she shared the news, and Zelda felt a flutter of fear. They had not discussed children, had not made plans. Then Killian turned to her, and his face was transformed by joy so intense it took her breath away. "A baby," he said, his voice breaking. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Zelda said, smiling through her own tears. In February, the doctor thinks. Killian pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "I am going to be a father," he whispered against her hair. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Zelda asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Killian said fiercely. "I am ecstatic, terrified, overwhelmed, but mostly just so incredibly grateful that I get to do this with you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Zelda continued working at the dress shop through the fall, adjusting her patterns as her body changed, creating new designs that accommodated her growing belly. She received a steady stream of orders from expectant mothers who appreciated having a dressmaker who understood their needs firsthand. Killian was attentive to the point of being overprotective, hovering whenever Zelda so much as bent over to pick something up. She found it both endearing and exasperating, finally sitting him down in December to have a frank discussion about how she was pregnant, not dying, and perfectly capable of living her normal life. "I know," Killian said, looking abashed. "I just worry. The thought of something happening to you or the baby." "Nothing is going to happen," Zelda assured him. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. We are quite good at it." "Not all women," Killian said quietly, and Zelda realized he was thinking of his own mother who had died when he was young. She took his hand, squeezing gently. "I am strong and healthy and I have excellent care," she said. "I will be fine, we will be fine." Christmas that year was magical. Zelda and Killian hosted their first holiday in their home with Margaret, Rosa, Old Man Dalton, and several of the ranch hands who had nowhere else to go joining them for dinner. The small house was packed with people, overflowing with warmth and laughter and the scent of roasting turkey. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Zelda stood at the window watching snow begin to fall. It was lighter than the snow that had fallen the year before, gentler, but it still reminded her of that day by the creek. The day her life had changed forever. Killian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her expanded waist, his hands splaying protectively over where their child grew. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. "About ice and laughter and a cowboy who saw past all my defenses," Zelda said. "About how the worst day of my life turned into the best thing that ever happened to me." "Best thing that happened to both of us," Killian corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was half dead before I met you, Zelda, going through the motions but not really living. You brought me back to life. We brought each other back to life," Zelda said, turning in his arms to face him. "That is what love does. It awakens us." Their son was born on February 14th, Valentine's Day, a coincidence that made both Zelda and Killian laugh through their tears. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zelda understood Killian's earlier fears, when pain and exhaustion made her wonder if she would survive. But Rosa was there, steady and competent, and the doctor Old Man Dalton had summoned from San Antonio knew his business well. When the baby finally emerged, screaming lustily, Zelda wept with relief and joy. The doctor placed the squirming bundle on her chest, and she looked down into a tiny red face, dark eyes blinking in the lamplight, and fell instantly, completely in love. "He is perfect," Killian breathed, his own face wet with tears as he leaned over to examine his son. "Absolutely perfect." They named him James, after Killian's father, with the middle name Michael, after Zelda's father. James Michael Edwards made his opinions known from the first moment, crying when he was hungry or wet or simply wanted attention, but also capable of periods of astonishing contentment when held close to his mother's heart. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Zelda remained at the ranch, taking a break from the dress shop while she recovered and adjusted to life with an infant. Killian rearranged his work schedule to spend as much time as possible with his new family, often coming home in the middle of the day just to hold his son and marvel at the miracle they had created. Margaret visited frequently, delighted by her first grandchild. Rachel sent gifts from the East along with plans to visit in the summer. Rosa doted on the baby, often appearing at their door with soups and stews and baked goods, insisting that Zelda needed to keep her strength up. The ranch hands were surprisingly interested in the baby, stopping by to peek at him and offer awkward congratulations. Timothy, now 18 and increasingly competent in his work, seemed particularly taken with little James, volunteering to help with anything that needed doing around the house. "You are going to make a good father someday," Zelda told him one afternoon as he held James with endearing care. Timothy blushed. "I hope so, madam, though I would like to find a wife first, and I am not having much luck there." "Give it time," Zelda advised. "The right person often appears when you least expect them." As summer approached and James grew stronger, Zelda gradually returned to the dress shop, bringing the baby with her. Margaret was delighted to watch her grandson while Zelda worked, and the customers loved seeing the baby, cooing over him and bringing small gifts. Life settled into a new normal, different from before but no less satisfying. Zelda and Killian learned to navigate parenthood together, sharing the late-night feedings and the exhausting days, celebrating each new milestone. James's first smile, his first laugh, the first time he rolled over, all were occasions for joy. On a warm day in August, Zelda and Killian took James on a picnic to the creek, the same creek where Zelda had fallen through the ice 20 months earlier. The water ran clear and gentle now, no hint of the danger that had lurked there in winter. They spread a blanket on the bank and sat together, watching James kick his legs and grab at the grass, his dark eyes taking in everything with solemn interest. "You ever think about that day?" Killian asked, echoing Zelda's own thoughts, about how differently things could have gone. "All the time," Zelda admitted. "If I had been a few yards farther north, the ice might have been thicker and I would never have fallen. If you had not been there, I could have died. If those men had not laughed, you might not have been so angry, might not have stayed so close. So many small things that had to align perfectly for us to end up here. Fate," Killian said simply, "or providence, or just extraordinary luck. Whatever you want to call it, I am grateful." "So am I," Zelda said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "So very grateful." James chose that moment to let out a demanding cry, and they both laughed, the serious moment broken by the very practical needs of an infant who was ready to eat. Zelda fed him while Killian unpacked the food Rosa had prepared, and they ate in companionable silence, a family complete. The years that followed brought more changes, more growth. When James was 2, Zelda became pregnant again, this time with a daughter they named Catherine Rose. She was quieter than her brother, more contemplative, with her mother's dark hair and her father's dark eyes. 2 years after that came another son, William Thomas, who seemed determined from birth to keep up with his older siblings. The small house grew crowded, and Killian approached old man Dalton about expanding. The elder rancher, now in his 70s and increasingly relying on Killian to run the day-to-day operations, suggested something different. He wanted to move into town, to live out his remaining years somewhere with less isolation. He offered to sell Killian the main ranch house at a price that was more than fair, essentially giving him the property in recognition of his years of loyal service. It was an overwhelming offer, and Zelda and Killian discussed it long into the night. The main house was large, almost too large, but it would provide room for their growing family and any children who might come in the future. It was also the heart of the ranch, the place from which all operations were coordinated. Accepting it would cement Killian's role as not just foreman but effective owner of the Diamond Creek Ranch, a responsibility he was ready to shoulder but which still felt momentous. In the end, they accepted, moving their family into the grand house that had once seemed so far beyond their reach. They kept their small house as well, using it for guests, and slowly put their own stamp on the main residence. Zelda's touches appeared throughout: curtains she had sewn, quilts she had made, small beautiful details that transformed the somewhat austere space into a real home. Old man Dalton moved into a comfortable house on the edge of Gonzales, visited regularly by Killian and the children. Rosa remained at the ranch, declaring that she was too old to change now, and someone needed to keep an eye on everyone. She took over the education of the children, teaching them to read and write, filling their heads with stories and practical wisdom. The dress shop remained Zelda's refuge, the place where she could focus on her own work and maintain her independent identity. Margaret ran it most days now, with Zelda coming in for fittings and to create special pieces. It was a good arrangement, allowing both women to feel useful and valued while managing the demands of family and business. When James was 10, a telegram arrived from the east. Rachel was coming to visit, and she was bringing a husband and 3 children of her own. The house exploded with excitement as preparations were made for the extended visit. It had been over a decade since Killian had seen his sister in person, and the prospect of reuniting made him almost giddy with anticipation. The visit was everything they had hoped. Rachel's husband was a kind man who worked as a banker, and her 3 girls were lively and sweet. They fit seamlessly into the Edwards household, the children running wild across the ranch while the adults caught up on years of separation. It was during this visit that Killian's past truly came full circle. Rachel shared stories about their mother, memories that Killian had thought lost to time, and he wept openly as he heard again his mother's voice, her laugh, her unwavering belief that her children would thrive despite the hardships they faced. She would have loved Zelda, Rachel said one evening as they all sat on the porch watching the sunset. She always said you needed someone strong, someone who would not be intimidated by your intensity, someone who would stand beside you as an equal. She was right, Killian said, pulling Zelda close. As usual. After Rachel's family returned to the east, life settled once more into comfortable routine. The children grew, each developing their own distinct personality. James was serious and responsible, already showing signs of the leader he would become. Catherine was creative and empathetic, often found drawing or playing elaborate imaginary games. William was pure energy, constantly moving, constantly exploring, driving his mother to distraction and his father to laughter. When Zelda was 35, she became pregnant for a 4th and final time. The pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, her body older and more tired, and both she and Killian agreed this would be their last child. Another son was born in late autumn, and they named him Benjamin Alexander, called Ben from the start. He was a surprise, a late blessing, and all the more precious for being unexpected. By the time Ben was 5, James was already 17 and helping seriously with ranch operations. He had his father's natural authority and his mother's keen intelligence, and it was clear he would one day run the Diamond Creek Ranch himself. Catherine, at 15, had discovered a passion for teaching and spent her days helping Rosa with the younger children, both her own siblings and those of the ranch hands. William, at 13, was still wild but channeling that energy into becoming an extraordinary rider and roper. And Ben, at 5, was the spoiled darling of the family, adored by everyone. Zelda stood on the porch of the main house one evening in the spring of 1893, watching her family scattered across the yard. Killian was teaching William a new roping technique. Catherine sat under a tree reading to Ben. James was repairing a fence near the barn, his movements efficient and confident. Margaret, now in her 60s and moving more slowly, sat in a rocking chair beside Rosa, the two old friends talking quietly. 17 years had passed since that December day when Zelda had fallen through the ice. 17 years of marriage, of partnership, of building a life together that exceeded anything she had imagined possible. She was 40 now, her body showing the evidence of 4 pregnancies and years of hard work. Her curves were more pronounced than ever, her dark hair threaded with silver, her face marked by smile lines and sun exposure, and she had never been more beautiful. Killian appeared beside her, slipping an arm around her waist in a gesture so familiar, it was almost instinctive. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, the same question he had asked hundreds of times over the years. "About ice and laughter and how grateful I am that I fell," Zelda said, turning to smile at him. "About how blessed we are." "Incredibly blessed," Killian agreed. He was 42 now, his dark hair also showing silver, his face weathered by sun and wind and time. But his eyes, when they looked at Zelda, held the same intensity, the same love they had held that first night by the fire. "You are my miracle, Zelda Edwards. You always have been." "And you are mine," Zelda replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. After 17 years of marriage, the kiss was still electric, still capable of making her heart race and her breath catch. They stood together on the porch, watching their children, their legacy, and felt the profound satisfaction of a life well lived. There had been challenges, certainly. Years when drought threatened the ranch, when cattle prices plummeted, when illness swept through the household. Times when they argued or disagreed, when the pressures of running a ranch and raising a family seemed overwhelming. But through it all, they had held fast to each other. They had remembered that they were partners, equals, two halves of a whole. They had chosen love every single day, even on the days when love was difficult, when it required patience or forgiveness or simply the determination to keep trying. As the sun set over the Texas prairie, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Zelda Garrett Edwards felt complete. She had found her purpose, her home, her heart's desire in the arms of a cowboy who had seen her not as she appeared on the outside but as she truly was on the inside. A cowboy who had pulled her from the ice and held on, refusing to let go, transforming a moment of crisis into a lifetime of joy. The laughter of those ranch hands so many years ago had been cruel, intended to diminish and embarrass. But it had also been the catalyst for everything good that followed. It had brought Killian running to her aid. It had sparked his protective anger. It had created the circumstances under which they could truly see each other. Sometimes, Zelda reflected, the worst moments of our lives are actually the doorways to our greatest blessings. We just have to be brave enough to walk through them, to accept the help offered, to believe that we are worthy of being saved. She had walked through that doorway, had accepted Killian's help, had believed in his sincerity and her own worthiness. And in doing so, she had found everything she had never dared to dream. As darkness fell, and the family began to drift inside for supper, Killian took Zelda's hand, lacing his fingers through hers in a gesture of unity and affection that had become second nature over the years. Together, they walked into their home, into the warmth and light and love that filled every corner. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to navigate together. But tonight, they would simply be grateful for the life they had built, the family they had created, and the love that had sustained them through everything. The girl who fell through the ice had drowned that December day in a way. Drowned in the depths of Killian's dark eyes, in the strength of his arms, in the promise of something more than she had ever thought possible. But from those icy waters, a woman had emerged, strong, confident, cherished, and whole. A woman who knew her worth, who had found her match, who lived every day in the glow of genuine love. And the cowboy who had helped her up and held on. He had found his purpose, his partner, his peace. He had discovered that saving someone could also mean being saved, that offering love could open your own heart to being loved in return. He had learned that true beauty had nothing to do with size or shape or society's narrow definitions, and everything to do with courage and kindness and the willingness to be vulnerable. Together, they had built something extraordinary. Not perfect, because nothing in life is perfect, but real and lasting and deeply fulfilling. They had raised children who knew they were loved, who understood that families came in all shapes and sizes, who would carry forward the lessons of respect and partnership they had observed in their parents' relationship. Old man Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep the following winter, and Killian inherited the Diamond Creek Ranch officially. The transfer of ownership was a formality, recognition of what had been true for years, but it still marked a significant moment. Killian was now a ranch owner, a man of property and influence in Gonzales County. But he wore these new responsibilities lightly, never forgetting where he had come from, never losing the essential humility that had first drawn Zelda to him. Margaret lived to see her grandson James marry a sweet girl from San Antonio and begin a family of his own. She died at 68, surrounded by her daughter, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, her last words a blessing over the family she had helped nurture. Zelda grieved deeply, but found comfort in knowing her mother had lived to see her happy, secure, and loved beyond measure. Rosa continued ruling the ranch household with gentle authority until she was well into her 70s, finally retiring to a small cottage on the property, where she spent her days receiving visits from the children and grandchildren, who all called her abuela. She lived to be 83, passing away in her sleep with Zelda and Killian by her side, her final smile suggesting she had seen something wonderful waiting on the other side. The dress shop remained in the family, passed down through Catherine when she returned to Gonzales after several years teaching in Austin. She expanded it, adding ready-made clothing alongside the custom work, and it became one of the most successful businesses in town. Like her mother, Catherine had a gift for understanding what made women feel beautiful, and she used that gift generously. William eventually left the ranch to become a Texas Ranger, much to his parents' mingled pride and terror. He rode off one summer morning at 21, his mother crying openly as she said goodbye, his father gripping his shoulder with hands that shook slightly. But William had inherited his mother's courage and his father's determination, and he made a name for himself keeping order in the wild territories, always coming home for Christmas with stories that made his younger brother's eyes shine with admiration. Ben, the unexpected late blessing, grew up to be a veterinarian, studying at a college in the East before returning to Gonzales to set up practice. He cared for the ranch animals with the same devotion his father showed in managing the land, and the two of them worked side by side for decades, their partnership echoing the one Killian had shared with old man Dalton all those years ago. Through it all, through children and grandchildren, through triumphs and setbacks, through the steady passage of years that turned young love into mature devotion, Zelda and Killian remained each other's anchor. They still talked long into the night, discovering new facets of each other even after decades of marriage. They still walked hand in hand across the ranch, finding peace in each other's presence. They still kissed like newlyweds when they thought no one was watching, making their children groan and smile in equal measure. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Killian surprised Zelda with a trip to San Antonio. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate in restaurants, attended the theater, and for 3 glorious days pretended they were young and carefree again. On the last night, as they danced in the hotel ballroom, Zelda looked up at her husband and saw the same man who had pulled her from the ice, who had held her when she was frozen and frightened, who had looked at her with eyes that promised safety and love. "Thank you for choosing me," she said softly. Killian's arms tightened around her. "Thank you for letting yourself be chosen. Thank you for taking a chance on a solitary cowboy who did not know what he was missing until you fell into his life." "Literally," Zelda added, and they both laughed, the shared history of that moment still capable of bringing joy even after a quarter-century. "I would do it all again," Killian said seriously. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, I would choose you again and again and again." "As I would choose you," Zelda replied, "always and forever." They danced until the music ended, until the ballroom emptied and they were the last ones left. Then they walked back to their room, hand in hand, 2 people who had built something beautiful from a moment of crisis, who had transformed laughter and cruelty into a love story for the ages. The years continued their steady march. Zelda turned 50, then 55, then 60. Her body changed with age, her movements slower, her hair now more silver than dark. But she remained strong, active, engaged with life. She continued working at the dress shop until she was 62, finally retiring to spend her days managing the ranch household, spoiling her grandchildren, and writing the poetry she had loved since childhood. Killian aged beside her, his body bearing the marks of decades of hard labor, but his spirit undiminished. He turned over the day-to-day running of the ranch to James when he was 65, though he still rode out most days to check on things, unable to fully let go of the work that had defined so much of his life. They grew old together, facing the losses that come with age, the friends who passed away, the bodies that betrayed them with increasing frequency. But they also celebrated the joys. Great-grandchildren being born, Catherine's dress shop opening a second location in San Antonio, William's retirement from the Rangers and his return home with a wife and 3 children, Ben's election as county veterinarian, a position of respect and authority. On a warm spring day in 1911, Zelda sat in a rocking chair on the porch of the ranch house, a quilt wrapped around her lap despite the mild temperature. She was 75 years old now, her body frail but her mind still sharp. Killian sat beside her, at 77 still stubbornly insisting he was fine despite the increasing tremor in his hands and the shortness of breath that came with any exertion. The ranch sprawled around them, now run by James with help from his own adult children, the 4th generation of family to work this land. The dress shop in town was thriving under Catherine's management. William had recently been elected sheriff, bringing his ranger experience to keeping order in Gonzales. Ben's veterinary practice was so successful he had taken on 2 apprentices. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren were scattered across Texas and beyond, a sprawling family tree that had grown from the simple joining of 2 lives 35 years earlier. "You remember the first time you brought me here?" Zelda asked, her voice thinner now but still holding traces of the vibrant woman she had been. "After I fell through the ice, of course," Killian said. "I remember everything about that day. Your hair dripping wet, your lips blue with cold, The way you looked at me like I was some kind of hero even though I had only done what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Zelda corrected gently. "Only you. Only the man I was meant to find." "Meant to fall for," Killian suggested with a smile. Zelda laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "That too, quite literally." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun move across the sky, feeling the warmth on their faces. After a lifetime together, they no longer needed constant conversation. Their connection was deeper than words, rooted in decades of shared experiences, of choices made together, of love lived out in 1,000 small daily actions. "I have been thinking," Killian said slowly, "about what happens next, after." Zelda knew what he meant. They were old now, their time growing short. "What have you concluded?" "That I cannot imagine existing without you," Killian said simply. "That whatever comes after this life, I hope we face it together. That if there is a heaven, it would only be heaven if you were there." Tears slipped down Zelda's weathered cheeks. "I feel the same. You have been my partner, my love, my best friend. You saved me that day by the creek, but you have been saving me every day since. By seeing me, by choosing me, by loving me so completely that I learned to love myself." "We saved each other," Killian said, taking her hand. His grip was weaker now, but no less sincere. "That is what love does. It transforms us from who we were into who we were always meant to be." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and gold, James came out to help his parents inside. He was 54 now, a strong, capable man who moved with the same quiet authority his father had always embodied. He helped them both to their feet, offering an arm to each, and slowly they made their way into the house that had been the heart of their family for so many years. That night, Zelda lay beside Killian in the bed they had shared for over 3 decades, listening to his breathing in the darkness. It was more labored than it should be, and she knew his heart was failing, that the doctor had given him months at most. She should have been terrified by the approaching loss, should have been desperate to hold on to every remaining moment. Instead, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. They had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich with love and meaning and purpose. They had raised children who would carry on their legacy of kindness and integrity. They had built something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Killian whispered back. "Now and forever and beyond forever." "Hold on to me," Zelda said, echoing words from so long ago, "like you did that first day." Killian's arm came around her, pulling her close despite the difficulty of the movement. "I will never let go," he promised. "Not in this life or the next." They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls so thoroughly intertwined that they had essentially become one. And when morning came and Catherine entered the room with breakfast, she found them exactly as they had fallen asleep. Together, peaceful, clearly gone in the night, their hands still clasped, their faces serene. The funeral was one of the largest Gonzales had ever seen. People came from across Texas to pay their respects to Killian and Zelda Edwards, the couple who had been pillars of the community for decades. Stories were shared about Killian's fairness as a ranch owner, his generosity to those in need, his unwavering integrity. About Zelda's kindness, her talent, her ability to make every woman feel beautiful regardless of size or age. About the love story that had captivated the town, the unlikely romance between a solitary cowboy and a curvy dressmaker that had produced such a remarkable family. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their headstones simple but elegant, bearing their names and the dates of their lives, and a simple inscription chosen by their children. They fell in love and held on forever. The Diamond Creek Ranch continued under James's management, thriving into the 20th century and beyond. The dress shop remained in the family through Catherine's line, eventually becoming a small chain of stores across South Texas. William's descendants became lawyers and judges, upholding the law their ancestor had once enforced with a gun. Ben's children continued his veterinary practice, caring for animals well into the modern era. But more than the businesses or the property or the professional achievements, what Zelda and Killian left behind was a legacy of love. Their children, having witnessed a partnership of true equals built on mutual respect and devotion, sought the same in their own relationships. They passed down stories about their parents, about the day their mother fell through the ice and their father pulled her out and refused to let go, about how something that began with cruelty and laughter transformed into one of the great love stories of their time. Generations later, descendants of Zelda and Killian Edwards would still visit those twin graves on the hill, would still marvel at the story of how their family began with a moment of crisis by a frozen creek in December 1876. They would look at faded photographs of a strong, curvy woman with kind eyes and a serious, handsome man whose rare smile transformed his face, and they would understand that what their ancestors had built was something rare and precious. A love that transcended time and circumstance, a partnership that proved beauty and worth had nothing to do with society's narrow definitions, a bond so strong that not even death could truly break it. In the end, the laughter of those ranch hands had been the greatest gift, though they never could have known it. Their cruelty had set in motion a chain of events that led to decades of happiness, to a family tree that would spread across the country, to a love story that would be told and retold for generations. They had laughed when the curvy girl fell in the ice. But the cowboy who helped her up and held on had the last laugh, and it was a laugh of pure joy. The joy of a man who had found his purpose, his partner, his peace. The joy of a life well lived, a love well expressed, a legacy that would endure. And if, on quiet spring evenings, visitors to the Diamond Creek Ranch sometimes thought they saw two figures walking hand in hand across the prairie, their laughter carrying on the wind, well, perhaps some loves truly are eternal. Perhaps some bonds really do transcend death. Perhaps Zelda and Killian had found a way to hold on to each other even beyond the grave, their souls as intertwined in whatever comes after as they had been in life. The story of the girl who fell through the ice and the cowboy who caught her had reached its conclusion. But it was not an ending, not really. It was a beginning, an origin story for a family that would continue growing, would continue spreading love and kindness and integrity throughout the world. It was a testament to the transformative power of choosing to see beyond surfaces, of helping without expectation of reward, of believing that everyone deserves to be loved for exactly who they are. Zelda had fallen through the ice all those years ago, but she had also fallen in love. And Killian had not just pulled her from the water, he had pulled her into a life beyond anything she had imagined possible. Together, they had built something beautiful from a moment of crisis, had transformed laughter and cruelty into a legacy of love that would echo through generations. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask for? What better epitaph could there be? They lived, they loved, they held on, forever.